Now, I would like to turn it over to Richard Peck, Vice President of Development and Philanthropy Services for the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and improvisational theater enthusiast. Joining him is Ashleigh Nelson, Executive Associate.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Amber. And thank you, Emily and Bill and Michaela and everybody who helped put this together today, as well as Ashleigh, who was my partner in crime and helping to put the PowerPoint together today. So thank you all for joining us. I hope that this will be a valuable hour plus for you. And to get things started, I'll just say that what I'll be drawing from today is mostly my experience from working at Dartmouth and outside of the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, working with volunteers. In my present role, I don't really work with volunteers, but I feel like I have had a career full of working with volunteers and also just being helpful to nonprofits in learning what they're trying to accomplish and being a resource for them. So just a little disclaimer to start. I think with that, let's just jump right in. I don't know, Ashleigh, if you're going to be starting to share the screen.
Yep.
Here we go. Okay, terrific. So today's presentation is called Utilizing Volunteer Fundraisers. And the spirit of this is really me thinking about volunteers as a partner. So volunteers give of their time, and we all know this from probably many of the presentations you've seen so far, but volunteers don't have to do this. They do it out of the goodness of their hearts. There's all kinds of different reasons, which we'll talk about through the presentation, but this is something they want to do. And when it comes to fundraising can be a little bit treacherous and tenuous and scary. And so the spirit of this is try to help fundraisers, especially volunteer fundraisers, do their best work and figure out how to create partnerships and get the resources that they need to do, again, the finest work that they can do for their respective institutions. So with that said, move on to the first slide. Okay, just a table of contents, the things we'll start with today. We're going to talk about understanding volunteers in the beginning. I'll talk a little bit about development staff, paid development staff at nonprofits, talk about some potential pitfalls that I've seen and some areas of opportunity. We'll do a case study, which is something I drew from my time at Dartmouth College, things that we can do together. I'll go into a separate case study of another nonprofit that I'll feature. And then we were going to do breakout groups. I'm not sure if we're going to have time for breakout groups today, but if we do have time, we'll do breakout groups. Otherwise, we'll do some Q&A at the end. So with that said, we'll start with the first slide. So volunteer statistics, always good to start with some statistics that we took from Volunteer Hub and AmeriCorps. So as you can see right from the top, only 55% of nonprofits assess volunteer impact, but as you've probably seen these numbers before, almost 400,000 volunteers contribute 36.6 million hours of service. That's amazing. And then things that I didn't really know until I looked up some of the statistics, individuals between the ages of 35 and 54 are most likely to volunteer. I thought it would be older people, but it's apparently the people in that particular age group. And volunteers under the age of 24 account for 22% of all volunteers. I thought that was interesting. And we've probably seen these statistics before. Volunteers are worth, on average, $24.14 an hour, according to an independent study. So there's value, obviously, in their time. But the last one was the one that was most surprising to me. In New Hampshire, 31% of volunteers fundraise or sell items to raise money. I did not know that. I think it was the highest level of all the volunteer categories. That one was the most amount of volunteers in that particular niche. So lots of volunteers are trying to fundraise for their respective institutions. So I was happy to see that, in the sense of probably lots of people could benefit from seeing a presentation, something like this. So next slide, please. All right, so what you'll see throughout the presentation is sometimes you'll see some where we've drawn the resources from, and sometimes it's just my opinion. So this slide is just my opinion. I've been fundraising for 16 years, and my experience is that people hate asking for money. It's scary to them. It's a foreign thing, especially during COVID this past year. People are just afraid to go out and ask for money and do things on behalf of their organizations. It's just not in people's nature. They feel like it's shaking people down. I've heard that word before, that phrase. It just feels uncomfortable. It feels very transactional for people, and I respect that. And so part of what I try to do is make it so that it is a little less scary, and that there are just some fundamentals that can make it feel go from transactional to start feeling like it's more about representation of the institution and helping do what you need to do for the particular institution that you are volunteering for, because they need resources. That's the bottom line. They need resources to do what they do. So next slide. So finding volunteers. So how do nonprofits find volunteers? So part of it is recruiting people, finding and applying targeted skill sets. So people come from a wide variety of skill sets. There are very many, what I call transferable skills that people can bring to the table, even if they weren't professional volunteers. They might have certain things. Maybe they were in sales, maybe they were teachers. So how would volunteers with the right skill set find you? So that's something you want to be thinking about as it relates to your own particular nonprofits. How do you matchmake? How do you find people who would be a good fit for you? So onboarding and training is important. I think if you're going to bring somebody in, again, we're going to stick to volunteer fundraisers. How are you onboarding them? Are you teaching them about your institution? Are you training them in some way to be ambassadors? How are you retaining them? What are the ways that they want to keep coming back? So again, providing those resources, providing some sort of way for them to stay connected. And then something that I never really hear people talk about is the idea of when volunteers leave, you might want to interview them. Maybe they're leaving because they're moving away or there's some other reason, but maybe they're leaving because they're dissatisfied. And I would want to know that before they leave, because maybe there's a trend or there's something in particular that is making them feel not as engaged. So learning that can help you build a better retention system, recruitment system, training system to keep your volunteers close to you. So what are expectations? In my experience, they want to be treated kindly. Again, they don't have to do this. They want to know what their job is. They want to be successful. A lot of people have come from places where they are focused on results. So what's my job? How can I be successful? How can you engage me effectively using my skill set? Do they have the tools and resources to be able to do their job well? In some cases, they want to have the same type of access that staff have. And even though that can't always be the case, how can we continue to give those volunteers something to make them feel close to the institution instead of feeling like they're kind of coming in, from the outside in and feel like they don't have what they need to do their job well. So to utilize their skill sets and experiences, you get to know them. Again, get to know their strengths and what their areas of opportunity are. So just talking about board member volunteers, some of them have a fiduciary responsibility. You need to know, for example, what amount of contributed revenue is needed to sustain the institution alongside other factors. So they have a vested interest in making sure that money is flowing in some sort of a regular way, in a sustainable way. But importantly, board member volunteers, and I'm talking about governing boards, they aren't necessarily expected to fundraise. And again, back to my original slide, they may hate it. And so there's a reticence to engage board member volunteers in this way. But they are sometimes expected to contribute a certain minimum dollar amount to set the tone for the importance of contributing. 100% participation is expected of our board. And therefore the board steps up with $50 or $1,000. But just again, knowing that if you're going to set the stage for other people wanting to contribute to your organization, you need to step up and show that leadership is also doing so. So questions that are asked sometimes is, should a minimum dollar be set for volunteers, or is it really just important to participate? And then what are the consequences of not contributing? So some of you may have heard this phrase before: give, get, or get out. So give money, get or make connections, be an ambassador, be a connector, even if you can't give a lot of money yourself, or maybe you can be somebody who connects outside individuals to the institution to make connections. Or get out. If you're not giving and you're not getting, or you're not making connections or being a good ambassador, you might want to ask yourself, how how am I being helpful? Maybe I'm not actually being helpful. Maybe I'm showing up at meetings and I'm not really being much of an asset to the institution. So just things to consider. So other volunteers. So outside of governing boards, there are also committees or advisory groups. So again, non-fiduciary, they don't necessarily are not necessarily thinking about the financial aspects of the institution or acting as in a fiduciary capacity. But again, I mentioned this before, they are ambassadors. So they could be educators, they can distribute information, they can post articles to LinkedIn, they can get people excited about the institution. These are ways, non-money ways to get people excited about what's happening at your respective nonprofit. All right, so differing expectations compared to development staff. So volunteers obviously not paid, development staff are paid. So assuming that volunteers are not paid, why do they do it? They do it because they love the institution. Maybe they're doing it because they're looking for meaning in their lives. I'll just go back to the loving the institution. Dartmouth, which I'll get to in a little while, Dartmouth alums bleed green, right? They can't wait to help Dartmouth College. They can't wait to go back and do something positive. But just the bullets down below, because they're looking for meaning in their lives. They want to be able to give back. Again, they have a lot to offer. What can they do to help? Sometimes people are bored and they just need something to do. It keeps them busy. It keeps the time going by. Sometimes the people are social. They just like to be with other people and be helpful in that way. And sometimes people just like to solve problems. How can I take my skill set and do something positive? So those are my experiences in working with volunteers. And for those many reasons, people like to connect non-paid volunteers. All right, development staff. There can be some perceptions here, and I just wanted to name these. Volunteers may be asked to do work that the development staff doesn't want to do. Maybe volunteers feel that. Maybe they feel like, oh, I'm getting the dregs here. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think that should, I think that to debunk that myth or to address that is really important. Development staff haven't thought too clearly about what success looks like for volunteers. That's incredibly important. Again, back to my earlier slides, I don't want people to come in and feel like, okay, I'm here to volunteer. I'm here to give it my best effort. And development staff haven't properly given them their marching orders or their specific tasks or strategy or tactics that just hasn't been thought too clearly through, and therefore you're not getting the best out of the volunteers. And then development staff, again, haven't provided the tools and resources. So they can't access things, they don't have the information, they haven't been trained. So they're not really being set up for success. So our development staff members responsive as well as proactive with the volunteers. So after you train them, after you get them onboarded, are you available for them? If the volunteer has a question, how are they going to access help? Are they emailing, texting? Is there some sort of a regular check-in? How are volunteers able to get what they need from the staff to be able to, again, do their jobs as well as possible? All right, some pitfalls. So this is my experience with some nonprofits who may fall back on outdated patterns. So in working with some boards, what going back to hating fundraising is that they'll fall back into patterns that they haven't necessarily been successful, but it's known and it's safe. So that is a bit of a contradiction, right? If it's safe but it's not working, why wouldn't you want to change that? So this is what I've noticed during COVID-19 is how nonprofits responded. Some of them responded in a very specific way, like let's just talk about what went well. Some nonprofits reached out. They said, yes, I know we're in very troubled times and things are going haywire, but I want to let you know this is what our nonprofit's doing to help out. This is how we're remaining relevant. This is what we need. And maybe they're having online events. You know, they're having some sort of an engagement event. It could be just a lunch and learn. It could be a minor fundraising event, but it's saying we're here, we're present. Don't forget about us. With everything else that's going on, we're available and we're relevant. And then the bullet below that, new donors. Some nonprofits found new donors. Community foundations, for example, like ours, found new donors because people were trying to help out. And so they reached out and they were making increased contributions, or they were giving new money. So those are things that went well. What didn't go well during COVID-19, the annual fundraising event, the thing we usually do in person, fell apart. We didn't have that happen this year. We were banking on that. We really wanted to raise all kinds of money, and that's the sort of our one big way to do it, and it didn't happen. So that could have been putting all your eggs in one basket. Didn't work out so well. Lack of outreach, I mentioned that before. They recoiled. They said, "Oh, we're not going to tell our story. We're going to just let people do what they need to do, and we won't tell our story. We won't reach out because of maybe respect, which I understand, but at the same time, people were looking to help. So a lack of outreach meant you were silent. They didn't know what happened to you. They didn't know what you were doing. So that could have been a mistake. And then the last part, no strategy. Again, just sort of let's wait until the dust settles. Let's wait till the people recover from COVID, and nobody knew how long that was going to be. And so therefore there was no strategy. They were just treading water. There was no plan B. And that could have been quite devastating from a fundraising standpoint. So let's talk about other things around a lack of strategic plan that nonprofits might have. I've seen this happen. A fundraising goal is randomly chosen. So there's no real structure on why they're asking for what they're asking for. It's just, how about we raise X number of dollars? And let's build a campaign around that. And I think that's a mistake, because I think people can see through that after a while, and it's not as compelling. So that's an error. Building something that's real, that you can talk about, that volunteers, ambassadors, others can talk about, is really, really important. There's no stewardship of current work through small groups or presentations. So that's important. Small group settings where you can tell your story, even if you're not fundraising per se. We're not asking for money. We're just telling businesses, individuals, anyone who's interested, they can come and sit and listen, and we can tell the story about the nonprofit and what's happening, where we've been, where we are, where we want to be. Even if it's not a campaign, there's no sort of ongoing engagement. And that's where volunteers also can be quite helpful. No cultivation of new audiences. For example, people who might partake of your particular nonprofit services, how are you getting to know those people? Are you going back to the same audiences you've always gone to, the current donors that you always have? Or are you trying to meet the next generation? You're trying to be creative around going and meeting new people. And then no deep analysis of past trends or past data. I throw that out there, CRM, some sort of a database where you compile this information. There's no tracking on, for example, hey, have we had a terrific trend in bequests? Have bequests been a way that we've really built a lot of the nonprofit resources that we have? Or not? Or are we getting trends around businesses giving to us, or certain individuals giving to us? There's no deep analysis of that. So therefore, people aren't really understanding their patterns, and they don't really know how to lean into those patterns. So using past data can be quite helpful. And again, little infrastructure. I mentioned no database, no CRM system. There's very inexpensive systems out there called Little Green Light, for example, as an alternative to Razor's Edge or some of the larger systems. A CRM is a customer relations management database. That's what a CRM is. So again, no personnel that are paid if there's situations around, if it's strictly volunteer fundraising. And then maybe some of these nonprofits have no website and no platform to donate. They don't have PayPal or anything that people can make a donation online. So again, these are pitfalls that have to do with the structure of the organization, and it can trickle down into how volunteers struggle with fundraising for these particular nonprofits. All right, so some of the other things I'll mention just around advisory committees or even fiduciary board members. Some feel the work is being done in the meeting and nothing beyond that. So people talk about the problems, but then there's no real work being done outside of the meetings. Others feel the work is done both in the meeting, but the majority is outside of the meeting. It's what are you doing to help fulfill the mission of the institution? Sometimes it's just It's just a lot of tactical work that needs to be done outside. Also, I'll just mention this. Sometimes volunteers or individuals will confuse recycling old information or talking about things of the past with taking action, with moving things forward. So they'll just say, this is what used to happen, or this is what we used to do, or this is some history. And sometimes that can be helpful, but sometimes it's confused with actually moving forward. And sometimes recycling old information are a way to psych yourselves out of doing what you need to be doing in the future. So it could be recycling strategic work, some tactical work, some of the things that just haven't been done in the past or should have been doing, just people talk about those things. But I think it's super important to review the strategic and tactical work of the past, from past board minutes, past conversations, so that you are moving forward and not either recycling information or duplicating work that's already been done. So very important to respect the fact that conversations have been happening in the past through the governing boards or through the advisory boards, and to be able to go back and review what's being said or what has been said to lead into doing good work in the future. So, around missing opportunities, are you asking for too little relative to the cause? This goes back to the idea that we don't like to fundraise, we don't like to ask for money, but I think what gives people confidence, whether you're a paid fundraiser or a volunteer, is that you are understanding what the institution needs and you're leaning into it and you're asking for what's needed. And that's very important, having the conviction to ask for what the institution is looking for so that it can build on its goals and make sure that it is fulfilling its mission. Don't under ask. Another issue, asking for cash gifts only, especially small dollars. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to nonprofits where they say, yeah, we don't process non-cash gifts. And I get it, non-cash gifts being real estate gifts, closely held stock, appreciated publicly traded securities, life insurance, tangible personal property. I understand if the institution is not able to take those gifts in. Find an alternative, find a backup resource. It could be a community foundation, it could be another source to be able to take in these types of gifts. So asking for cash gifts is easy in the sense that people have cash, they give cash. It's very common for people to give cash, especially small dollars, but raise your sights a little bit. Look at things beyond cash, look for ways to capture assets that people have that might not be in the form of dollars. Again, I mentioned this before, focusing on event-based fundraising, that does have its place, but be careful of putting all your eggs in one basket. The idea that if you just have a once a year event-based fundraising event or event-based fundraising is part of your strategy, that could be devastating. So think about diversifying the way that you ask for money, the ways that you engage people to give to your organization. And again, having the non-cash gift discussions relative to the potential gift opportunities. If you have a $5 million campaign, a $250,000 gift can go a long way, and that can come in the form of a real estate gift, or it can come in the form of something else that you might not expect. So don't be afraid to have those conversations, but know that you don't have to do the work. You can lean on another entity to be able to take that gift in for you, liquidate it, and then put it toward the cause. So bequest intentions, I mentioned trends before. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to organizations and I'll say, those who do know the data, I'll say, where did you get your biggest gift from? And they'll say, we got it from bequest. I say, oh, great. Do you have anything on your website or any materials to attract bequest intentions? And they'll say, no, we don't. We don't do that at all. Well, I mean, that's a mistake. So put something out there to be able to say, at least this is who to call, or here's some sample bequest language, or something where there's at least an indication that you invite such gifts. Could be a story about a bequest that came in that was put to the cause and was incredibly beneficial to the organization. And again, solution-based fundraising. How do you move the institution forward? What are the ways that fundraising or dollars can help fulfill the mission? So it's more of a way to move towards something. People are attracted to that. Donors are very attracted to the idea of doing something positive, creating impact, versus filling in a hole or a gap, a deficit. It's more like, what are you going toward? And how can we be good ambassadors in helping get there? So one thing I do want to mention is that sometimes we're in our silos. And I think a really good thing to do as an ambassador, or whether you're a volunteer fundraiser or a paid fundraiser, a paid staff fundraiser, is thinking about donors from the sense of they have multiple allegiances. There's lots of things, lots of nonprofits they're attracted to, lots of causes that they're attracted to. And what happens, I think, sometimes is nonprofits think, well, we're the favorite of this donor. We're their top choice, and their allegiance is only to us. And that is far from the truth. And I'll tell you, working at a community foundation, it couldn't be clearer. People have many, many different interests. So how do strategic donors think? They think about solving a problem. They think about solving homelessness or helping kids or helping pets or animal welfare. They think about the environment. And you, as one nonprofit, are part of that solution. So knowing the landscape and knowing what other nonprofits are doing, or being able to talk to donors about solutions, is super important. Instead of just selling your own nonprofit, think about what the solution looks like, or how to be part of something bigger than just your own nonprofit. That is something I think that's overlooked a lot. And I would highly recommend people know the landscape. Who are your strategic partners? Who are complementary organizations around you that can help build toward whatever that solution looks like? They're working in collaboration with each other, and maybe all boats will rise. Maybe the strategic donor gives to all the organizations because they see it as part of a cohesive network of solution-based nonprofit networking. So just something to think about. So we're going to take a pause here for some questions. And so I'll just stop right here. Anybody have any questions that they want to post to the chat? Anything on this slide or any prior slides?
Rick, there was one question from Kate, which was, what exactly does CRM represent in words?
Oh, I'm sorry. I mentioned that earlier. It's customer relations management. It's a database. It's a fancy name for a database or a system in which you put your donors, your prospective donors, professional advisors, information into it. You know their giving history and so on. So it's just a way to aggregate information versus putting it on a spreadsheet or filing it in some other way. All right. So we already touched on this, but if you can answer, shows whether or not you were paying attention, right? All right. So the answer was 35 to 54. It was mentioned in an earlier slide. So people ages 35 to 54 are most likely to volunteer their time, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And just out of curiosity, how did you find the institution you volunteer for? Think of one institution if you volunteer for many. Just nail down one.
While people are answering the the poll question. It looks like we have another question in the chat.
Sure.
So we have a question from Jennifer. One of the hardest things I face is we've always done it this way from volunteers. Do you have any recommendations for helping our long-standing volunteers open up to new ideas?
Well, it goes back to change. Change is hard. And to be fair, that whatever system or methodology they've used in the past might have worked for them. And that's why they stick to it. And we can all think of situations where we don't like to change. We don't like to we don't like to veer from what we've done in the past. But I think what it is it's a matter of respecting the fact that there was a process, and yet at the same time, just kind of talking about success. So really backing up and saying, this isn't really necessarily about the task at hand or the process. It's really about, what does success look like? So helping to brainstorm that with volunteers can be helpful. And I realize volunteers have been around a long time who say, we've always done it this way, we don't want to change. It is a tougher conversation, absolutely. But at the same time, I think it's important just to still back up and say, what if we could do this and make it easier and get better results? Would you be interested in that? What if there's a way to make this less onerous? I think people are interested in making their life easier. And if it means making it easier and doing something more effective, sometimes people will come around. Sometimes people won't. They're very stuck in their ways, and that can be an issue. But I would like to think that you can just have a good open-ended conversation with people just to talk about the pros and cons of sticking with the old way of doing things. So sharing the results here, this is quite fascinating. We have, a few people said a friend told me about the institution. Some went to the institution directly to inquire. Some were recruited by the institution. And for those, the 6 people who said none of the above, if you could just post your answers to the chat, that would be great, because I'd be interested in how you found the institution you volunteer for, if it wasn't from any of the means up above. Just randomly, if you feel like it, if you're interested, just post that to the chat. That would be interesting information for the rest of us. All right. So terrific. I'm seeing some come through. Advertised on the radio. Know them through my community. Okay, great.
Rick, it looks like there's one more question from Kate. It says, how has CV changed the horizon for donation?
How has CV? What is CV? I'm sorry. COVID, okay. Change the horizon. Well, in some ways, I'll say from a community foundations perspective, it made community foundations more relevant. And so people were attracted to community foundations because they felt like we really knew the ground and could really be helpful. But let's face it, there's a huge deficit for a lot of these nonprofits. I mean, last year really set them back. But I guess what I'd say is just thinking about the future, it's positioning yourself again, saying, what's my story? How can we get people interested in what we're doing? How can we be part of something bigger than us? What are, if it's the arts, are we telling the story about the arts and how we as a nonprofit fit into that? So, and then going back to a lot of the things I mentioned already, questioning the ways that you've done business, and are there ways to readjust and course correct and be able to focus on things in a much more substantive and positive and efficient way. So that's what I'd say. I mean, it's going to be a rough road ahead, no question, but it's an opportunity to rejigger things up and say, well, what have we been doing all along that hasn't been working? And this COVID might have put it under a magnifying glass, that we should have probably made these changes before, but we just didn't. And now we need to, and could be to our demise if we don't actually make some positive changes. So that's what I'd say about the long term. So, all right, I'm going to dive back in now. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for answering some of those poll questions. Thanks for your comments about how you found the institutions. Right, so we're going to launch into a case study here. So this is based on my experience at Dartmouth College. And it's really a story about meaning and engagement and so on. And I feel like we had a good outcome, and I feel like it was important to put this up here. So my reference period is 2005 to 2009. That's when I worked at the Dartmouth College gift planning office. I was traveling around the country working with volunteers. Well, I'll explain that in just a second, but a lot of it was I was meeting with potential donors and donors to Dartmouth, usually Dartmouth alums from the undergraduate school, and talking to them about planned giving, talking to them about the bequest intentions, charitable gift annuities, charitable remainder trust. No pressure, just more like awareness marketing is really what I did. And I enjoyed that very much. So along the way, I was assigned to the gift planning chairs. So each of the classes at Dartmouth College, and at the time, I think it went back to 1929 with this one particular gentleman, but for the sake of this, it was really the more active classes when I was there. It was 1940 to 2002. There was actually a gift planning chair for 2002. And so these people were representatives for their class to engage and help bring in new members to what's called the Bartlett Tower Society, which is the legacy society at Dartmouth College. And so if somebody has a bequest intention or some sort of planned gift in their estates, they would notify the college. And then if they wanted to, they would be recognized through the Bartlett Tower Society. So what I want to talk about is sort of the structure here. When you think about class structure, there were class president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. And then as it related to fundraisers, the ones who got the big spotlight were the class agents. Class agents were the ones that were really most respected. But I mentioned the gift planning chairs because they were second-class citizens as opposed to the class agents that were more like first-class citizens. Second-class citizens, I mentioned this because a former class agent, Anna, and a gift planning chair told me, they said, we just don't get the recognition in meetings that the others do. You know, everybody else gets all kinds of kudos and respect, and gift planning chairs we're not recognized in meetings. People don't seem to know what we do. They don't see us as adding to the bottom line. When there's some sort of a campaign, you don't really hear about planned gifts. You don't hear about deferred gifts or bequest intentions being mentioned. So anyway, there were some problems there. So, you know, what does success look like? So what we did was we started to, well, first of all, we had a book that listed the members of the Bartlett Tower Society per class. And I also had, of course, a reference sheet of the gift planning chairs per class. And so what I started to do, well, actually, I'll just be perfectly transparent. I remember being in a meeting, and I remember us talking as a group, and we talked about the gift planning chairs, and there was this feeling like, wow, it's really hard to manage all the gift planning chairs across the classes. And I said, well, why don't we terminate the program? Why don't we not have gift planning chairs anymore? It sounds like there's some issues that we need to work through. And what came back was, they said, no, we can't get rid of the gift planning chairs. They're part of the fabric of Dartmouth College. And I said, okay, in that case, let's lean into it and make them successful. And let's figure out how to engage these gift planning chairs so they feel like they are, you know, valued. So what we did was we said, okay, well, let's go in and find out who the active chairs are. And if they're active, great, let's meet, let's talk about goals. Let's talk about how they can have conversations with their classmates about planned giving, what the forums could be to talk about planned giving, how they can be more engaged with their class agents and presidents and so on. You know, how can they be more responsive and so on. And then, you know, engaging the volunteers in a very substantive way. We also ended up replacing a few volunteers. Some of them just wouldn't respond to my emails. They wouldn't, you know, meet with me when I was going out on the road. So I said, well, okay, that's all right. Let's find somebody else. I mean, and sometimes they were doing it as a placeholder. Somebody said, oh, being a gift planning chair is easy. You just have to, you know, show there's not much work to do. So we kind of tried to change that perception and say, no, there is work to do. We do want to know who the people in the class are who have named Dartmouth in their estate plans. So tried to get more active, engaged gift planning chairs versus those who are more passive. So one thing I'll mention, one creative thing, there was a gentleman, Stan Bergman, class in 1955. He did something as a gift planning chair that I thought was unique. He was an estate planning attorney. And what he would do is he would give incentive to their classmates. If you named Dartmouth in your estate plans, he would create an estate plan for you, a will or trust for free. He wouldn't charge you. Normally he would charge a decent amount of money for that, but that was a way to incentivize his classmates to name Dartmouth. So I just thought that was worth mentioning because he not only was a very active chair, but he was somebody who found a creative way to incentivize. So, and then I mentioned I did lots of visits around the country. I felt like people were feeling more engaged and valued, and they were just doing things they felt that were more substantive and working with potential donors. Again, people that maybe the gift planning office, as a paid fundraiser myself, I wasn't necessarily being connected to certain classmates. So the volunteers were really good about making those connections. And again, I guess the moral of the story is they felt that they felt there was a stronger purpose in their work. And as a result, we would see many more new Bartlett Tower Society members. We'd see more emails back and forth between the gift planning chairs and the staff. And it just felt like there was some energy there and some pride. And that felt good. And we just kept on building on that. So I felt like that was a story worth mentioning about good, tight engagement. They knew what their task was. They knew what they needed to do. They knew how to be, they valued being recognized, and they valued engagement. So what can we do, right? So let's move on to the next slide. So what can we do to make sure we, being the paid staff or staff in general, to help the volunteers? What's some guidance around representing the organization? So, as I said before, basic facts about the institution, providing basic training to the volunteers, facts and figures, statistics, mission. What are you trying to accomplish? Where are you going? What is the institution looking like? Where do they want to go in 5 years? Tell some stories about impact. What is your nonprofit done? Where is it going? Something engaging. People love stories. They're a terrific way to exemplify the value of your institution. And what I like to call the cocktail party discussion. If you only had a few minutes and you were talking to someone and you said, I'm a volunteer or I'm a board member. And they said, oh, really? Tell me more. How would you let them know what you do as a volunteer or what the institution stands for in a succinct way that would be engaging? Another way to think about it is like the elevator speech. And what I mean by that also, just another layer down, is talking about problems versus talking about the exciting vision ahead. For example, imagine being in an elevator with somebody and you find out they're a volunteer or they're somehow affiliated with a nonprofit. And you say, well, tell me about the nonprofit. But the whole elevator ride, the person's telling you all the problems. Oh my gosh, we don't have this, we don't have that. It's a real issue. Well, by the time that person steps off the elevator, they are not engaged with your organization for sure. They are not, they just want to walk away and not, it doesn't engage them at all. But on the opposite side, if you're talking about the exciting things that are happening with the organization, where you're going, where the institution is thinking that it could be in 2 years or 5 years, that's something that people can get into. They want to be part of that. They want to be part of that success. So, and that person on the elevator could be a donor. It could be a potential donor. You don't know. You don't know what they could do. You don't know what their capacity is. You don't know who they know. So painting a pessimistic picture about your organization, even if you're talking from the heart and you care about the organization, if you're talking too negatively, it can be a turnoff. But if you're talking very positively, it can be something that people feel compelled to want to know more about. So again, what is your donor's story? So, and why are they connected to the institution? So again, I'm mentioning those stories above. What is it that keeps people engaged with the institution, and how can you compile lots of donor stories about the institution? So, easing fears associated with fundraising. Again, people don't like it. They feel like it's transactional. It scares them. People have said to me many times, boy, I would never want your job. And I don't feel that way at all. I feel like I represent the institution and I'm trying to do the good work, right? So just easing fears. People who care about an institution like to be engaged. So engage the volunteers and engage the potential donors, engage the donors. They want to know what's happening. And as far as making asks, we hear a lot about making the ask, the big ask. Here it is, the big moment. An ask in the end is just an ask. And usually it follows, hopefully, good stewardship or good cultivation. In other words, people may want to contribute something if they like what you're talking about. So, and sometimes people appreciate being asked because they know what the expectations are. They know what you're trying to accomplish. It's not a scary thing. It sets the stage for further conversations. And if people can't give that level of money to you, or they can't give, they'll tell you that. But it's okay to ask. And if you're not comfortable asking for money, again, it scares you to death. It's the last thing you want to do. How can you be a good connector? How can you be somebody who is a good ambassador that gets out and educates? Because so much of this work is awareness marketing, education. Let people know what you do. Let people know what the institution does. That is so important. And dollars follow. People follow because they're inspired. So it's not a very cold transaction. It's engagement, awareness, all of that. And then the last point here, just does the volunteer have the personal conviction of helping the institution get what it needs to serve its mission and vision? People's passion is contagious. If a volunteer really enjoys the work, it goes viral. People love that. They want to know more. The volunteer can do so many things if they feel that the institution is something they can get behind. So some things that just resources for you, or just some things to think about: goal setting, again, beginning with the end in mind. What is the institution trying to accomplish? This may not be the volunteer's role to come up with the goal setting, but the volunteer obviously can help support that. So I've enjoyed the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's where the begin with the end in mind comes from, as well as a lot of other great tips around being effective and being, again, your best self. There's a lot of nuggets in that book. And also, what are the volunteers' goals? Just going back to, what do the volunteers want to accomplish when they come and work for this particular, or volunteer for this particular institution? Now, going down the line here, personal recognition. People like to be recognized. They like to be recognized by the institution, within the institution, for the good work that they're doing. And as I mentioned before with the Dartmouth College scenario, they like to be recognized amongst their peers. They like to know that they're respected for the work that they're doing. And again, I mentioned this before, asking for money versus making connections. They are different. Depends on what your skill set is, depends on what you're comfortable with. Both can work. Some people are comfortable asking for money and making connections. Some people are really good at making connections. Some people are really good at asking for money. Just find out, as it relates to volunteer fundraising, where you fit. And then, I mentioned this before in an exit interview, but how can the volunteers be better managed from the volunteers' perspective? Volunteers, I believe, have a duty to be forthcoming and say, I don't like the way I'm being managed. I think that it could be better. This is what I'm missing. I'm not as effective as I could be. This is what I need. And to be able to have that conversation with paid staff and management is really important, because otherwise they're going to think the volunteers have what they need and they're going to go out and get what they need to get done. And that's not necessarily true. So best practices for tracking outreach efforts. I mentioned the CRM, the database. Populating the database on a regular basis by staff, could be informed by volunteers, especially with prospective donors. Volunteers can be a slew of, can be a wealth of information of, here's places we should go and talk, here are people we should get to know. Volunteers can be tremendous in building that out. And I mentioned regular check-in meetings. How are you checking in with your volunteers to make sure they're getting what they need? And what's working and not working? Small events work. They are a great way to engage people on a local level and get them what they need. Website marketing, what's working or not working as it relates to getting the word out. Social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. What are different ways that you get the word out about your particular institution? Person to person, really nothing beats that. Just getting to know people on a person-to-person basis and having a conversation is huge. If you're in a campaign, the campaign materials should feel accessible. Hopefully you can have one-pagers. You can give certain individuals something specific versus giving them a whole brochure. If you give them a whole brochure, you want to point them to the things that you think they might be most interested in, but ideally campaign materials can be broken out so that it's like, oh, this person's interested in this one particular thing. Here's one particular piece from our campaign materials that you'll want to study. And you may or may not have heard of the gift pyramid. If you're in a campaign, You're looking at a pyramid, for example, and at the top of the pyramid might be the highest level gifts, but you'll have the fewest amount of gifts at the top of the period. So if you're asking for $100,000, you might not be asking for $100,000 from a lot of people, but you may get a few or at least one $100,000 gift in your campaign. And the bottom of the gift pyramid could be $100 gifts or something very small, but you get a lot of those. So ideally, with a gift pyramid, sometimes people can use those as a visual and say, where do you see yourself on this gift pyramid? Knowing all the things we've talked about, the mission, the vision, where we're trying to go, how do you see yourself being helpful? And so volunteers can do that, paid staff can do that, and so on. It can be a good visual tool, or it can be at least something you have in the back of your mind. So, and then what are we missing? What else should we be doing as an institution? Having those conversations. Is there something out there that is an effective engagement tool that our volunteers can be part of, that our paid staff can be part of, that we're missing? So, food for thought. All right, and I'll just breeze through this. Another case study of an institution that I'm familiar with, a nonprofit. Here are their issues. A primitive database. I mentioned CRM. Again, you can only do so much with spreadsheets. After a certain point, you need to have something that feels substantive and that it's enduring, that as people come and go, there's a track record on who's donating to your institution or who the prospective donors should be. So they had a very primitive database in this one particular nonprofit. There was no proactive outreach to their constituency, to their donors, other than annual appeal letters. Again, a mistake. There's a whole year that you can be doing something to engage your most loyal donors. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an ask. It's just, what are you up to? Tell me something good. Tell me something positive. Why should I be excited about your institution? So no proactive outreach. The website was adequate. It was fine. It was engaging enough, I guess. It had PayPal, so people could make online donations, and PayPal is actually pretty easy to use. So it's fine. They have a newsletter. Newsletter's fine. It's engaging enough. Occasionally, they would have a house party, maybe a stewardship event, maybe a it's kind of a stewardship, meaning stewarding your existing donors, and cultivation, meaning trying to find new donors. Occasional house party and an annual meeting. So I think that's sort of like stepping back from that. It's a good way to sort of say, what else could we be doing? Should we be updating our database? What kind of outreach can we be doing throughout the year? Can we engage our volunteers, our board members, to tell a story? Use any sort of social media beyond the appeal letters? Can we publish things in the newspaper? Can we put articles out there, opinion pieces? Is the website engaging? Can people find what they need? Can they find their way to basic information? Is it clumsy to navigate? And there are many website designers and search engine optimization experts that can help with that. Again, is the newsletter giving the people what they want? Or is it just kind of rote and boring? Is it as engaging as it could be? Does it tell the story from a statistical standpoint? Does it tell engaging people stories, and person-to-person type stories? Do you want to go back and read that newsletter? Do you save it? Or is it something you toss in the trash? And then the house party information. Again, what are you doing there to engage people? And then is your annual meeting engaging? Or could it be more engaging? Could you focus and showcase the best of your institution? So I just mentioned that as an opportunity for you to step back and think about the institution you volunteer for, or the institution you work for as it relates to a nonprofit. Are there ways to upgrade? And not to say you have to do it all in one day, but is it something you could be doing over the course of months, years, steady as she goes, moving into that particular arena? Also, it's not listed here, but also focus groups, or just candid conversations with people. Ask them about all these things, not necessarily the database, but the appeal letters, the website, the newsletter. What do you think about it, folks? Do you think this is engaging? Do you Do you think this is something, what advice do you have for us? That can be also very informative. So, and just following up on the case study, and I just want to make sure we leave a little bit more time for questions. So just a few more slides here. Strategic Planning Committee, this particular nonprofit, creates the why. Again, why do we do what we do? Where are we going next? And then there's a capital campaign committee. So they're the fundraising committee. So there's a chair. They recently reviewed the notes of a marketing and development committee from the past that they engaged in those particular notes, and that was very beneficial. They extracted information about their database, their fundraising efforts, best practices and suggestions, all extracted from the notes of the marketing and development committee. And then consultants. What consultants should we be working with? Do we need to do a feasibility study? Is there a timeline we should be considering as far as our campaign? And going back to the volunteers, do we have the right volunteers on these committees? What's their accountability? What's the expectation? Do they know what success looks like? Do they know that they need to be doing work sometimes outside of the meetings, right? Outside of the regular check-in meetings, what's the work that needs to be done outside of that? So in this situation, the Marketing and Development Committee is in close contact with the Strategic and Capital Campaign Committees, so they can round out and be helpful to deliver on what the Strategic and Capital Campaign Committees are trying to do, which is, again, going back to look at the website, the newsletters, the ways that they can market out, the branding, and so on. So that's all there. All the fundamentals are there. And again, I present this to you so you can reflect on your own institution and say, what are we doing? How are we structured? Are we structured for success? Do we have different committees working together with each other, or are they in competition with each other? Or are they not talking to each other? What's the situation? So in summary, understanding your volunteers, just getting to know what they want to do, what their skill sets are, what training they need, how they can be successful, what means something to them, how they can stay engaged, how they can be helpful in furthering the mission. Development staff, what's the development staff's accountability in engaging those volunteers, specifically the volunteers that are focused on fundraising. We talked about a lot of the pitfalls, things that need to be addressed, talked about plenty of areas of opportunity. And again, what can we do together? Thinking about what success looks like, how we can be collaborative, how we can think about success, beginning with the end in mind, and working towards something that feels substantive and furthers the mission of the institution. So, we'll pause there. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. And just open it up right now. We have about 13 more minutes or so. Give you a chance to digest that. I've given my personal email address here. If you have any questions, it's my cell phone number as well. If you have any questions, you can feel free to text me, call me, set up a time to chat. And there's my work email as well, rp@nhcf.org. I'm happy to have informal conversations with anybody who'd like to.
So
Rick, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oops.
Oh.
Is anyone there?
Hold on.
Okay.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So I know there are a lot of smaller nonprofits out there, right, who may have a pretty limited staff, may not have necessarily a person devoted entirely to development, so they're really focusing on their board to fundraise. But then you have the age-old problem of the board thinking it's the staff's role to fundraise. So how might you navigate that to sort of empower both of them to have that discussion, but also to be like, have those conversations?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think there's lots of assumptions, right? So the volunteers may say, well, it's the staff's job. They're the ones who are accountable. We're just icing on the cake. We can be helpful. And then the opposite might be true. The staff might say, well, gosh, there's so much firepower in these volunteers. we're not nearly maximizing what they could be doing out there, whether it's soliciting for dollars or engaging people and connecting people. I think it just has to be a very frank conversation about what those expectations are, because otherwise too many assumptions and you lack accountability, you lack a focus on what that looks like. I think of it ultimately as complementary. This is what the staff's doing. And then they have only so much as far as either their skill set or their outreach or their engagement or their networks. Enter the volunteers. What are the volunteers able to do that can complement that, that can add to that? And how can they be accountable for their work? So I really believe it starts with a very frank conversation and to respect the fact that this is what the staff can bring to the table and this is what the volunteers can bring to the table. Otherwise, a lot of assumptions are made and the potential is not realized. We're not reaching out to as many people as we could. We're not leveraging our volunteer talent as much as we could be. So I think it just comes down to make no assumptions, talk about what success looks like, talk about where the strengths and weaknesses are, and figure out how the two can complement each other. Any other questions? So the one in the, let me see if I can read that from Maria. What is the best way to engage committee volunteers in doing that work outside of the meetings? Right now, the meetings are set to end with questions for the volunteers to do work, but typically when we come back to meet, little work has been done outside. I think that just goes back to accountability. Again, frank conversations, just sit down with people. I noticed that you're not doing a lot of the work that we talked about outside of the meeting. What are your obstacles? Is it time? Do you feel like you don't have the tools? Are you nervous about something? What is it? Just let me help you. Let me help you be successful. And hopefully they're frank with you and they say, this is what my issues are. You know, I myself, I can just speak for myself. As a volunteer, I take my volunteer work very seriously. I know there's a lot of work to be done outside of the meetings. Sometimes it's just the way you work as an individual. You're an achiever. You want to get things done. You want to come back with success stories. And sometimes you're more like, hey, my strength is in my knowledge and my history or things I've learned from other nonprofits. So I think it comes down to sitting down with the volunteer and say, listen, I don't care if it's baby steps, but when you come back, I want you to at least be able to have done these things. Do you think you can do that? And if they, sure, I can. And then they come back and they do those small things, they great. What if we ramp that up a little bit? You did this. Because otherwise there's just total disconnect between the staff and the volunteers and disappointment, quite frankly. And again, lack of achieving one's potential. So frank conversations is the thing I'll always default back to. Any other questions? What, in my experience, has been the biggest factor relating to volunteer satisfaction or success? Again, mutual goals, looking at what success looks like, to say, the volunteers are going to come back and say, I knew what my job was. I had the tools to do it. I felt like I was respected. I felt like I was recognized. I had regular check-ins. When I came back, I could see that we were moving the ball forward and we were doing it together, not just me, but with other volunteers as well. I mean, that's true for anything, whether you work for a company or you volunteer or you're a family member or you're a friend or you're on a team, all those things are true, right? You want to know what the goals are and how you can be part of a collective success. So the biggest factor, I think, is just understanding what makes the volunteer tick and what the institution needs. And making sure you try to deliver on that. And then my experience, volunteers keep coming back because they feel so satisfied with what they're doing, and they feel they're excited about it. They want to build on what they've done, and that's fun for me as somebody who's paid to be able to see these volunteers want to come back and do good work. So it's fun. Any other questions? What acknowledgement have you found more appreciated? Let's see if I understand that. Just what types of acknowledgement have been the most, people have been most receptive to, maybe? If that's what you're asking, Kate. Yes, okay. So, nothing like verbal appreciation, just a sincere thank you. Thank you through email, thank you through a phone call, thank you at the end of a meeting. Again, people don't have to do this. They have plenty of other things they can be doing with their time. A sincere thank you means a lot. And then other ways, maybe a small gift. Maybe again, I found actually publishing a story about somebody, publishing a story about a volunteer. And I'll just say this, sometimes the volunteers are like, no, I don't really want to be published. No, thank you. But sometimes they can come around and say, sure, you can feature me. And that can be monumental, because then they're featured in a publication and all these people say, I didn't know you were a volunteer for that organization. Oh, I think that's great that you do that. And in some ways it helps you be a better ambassador, because now more people are attracted to the organization you're volunteering for. So I just find that, sometimes the simplest things can be most beneficial and can resonate the most with volunteers, just like it resonates with all of us. We all like to be appreciated. We all like to know that our time is being well spent, and that we're doing good work. So that kind of acknowledgement, I think, can go a long way. Any other questions in our final few minutes together? All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I really appreciate your time today, and hopefully you found some of this valuable, if not most of it valuable. If not, I'm wide open to feedback. Please email me, call me, tell me what you needed, what you were missing, or what you found to be most beneficial. I'd appreciate that feedback. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Emily.